Mid-song, Elvis's voice stopped. 30,000 people held their breath. A drunk man had just insulted him. The microphone hung in his hand. The band kept playing for 2 more beats before they realized. Then silence. Complete, suffocating silence. What happened in the next 60 seconds would become one of the most talked about moments in rock and roll history. A moment that revealed who Elvis Presley really was when the spotlight burned brightest and the stakes were highest. Memphis, Tennessee. August 1974. The Mid-South Coliseum was packed beyond capacity. Every seat filled, people standing in the aisles, security struggling to maintain order. Elvis had returned to his hometown for a special concert, and the city had turned out in force. The air was thick with anticipation, sweat, and the electric charge that only a sold-out arena can generate. Elvis had been on stage for 40 minutes. He'd moved through his classics with that trademark blend of power and vulnerability that made him untouchable. Suspicious Minds had brought the crowd to their feet. Can't Help Falling in Love had them swaying with lighters raised. He was in his element, commanding the stage with the confidence of a man who'd been doing this since he was a teenager with nothing but a guitar and a dream. But something was different that night. Row 12, Section C. A man in his late 30s, clearly intoxicated, had been getting progressively louder throughout the show. His friends tried to quiet him, but he was past listening. He'd come with a chip on his shoulder and enough whiskey in his system to turn resentment into aggression. Elvis was midway through American Trilogy when it happened. The song was building toward its emotional climax, the moment where his voice would soar over the orchestra, when a voice cut through the music like broken glass. "You ain't nothing but a sellout!" The arena seemed to tilt on its axis. Time stretched. Elvis's voice faltered for just a fraction of a second, but in that fraction, everything changed. The band noticed first. The drummer's sticks hesitated mid-beat. The guitarist's fingers stopped moving. One by one, the instruments fell silent until the only sound in that massive space was the echo of those words bouncing off the walls. Elvis stood center stage, microphone still raised to his lips, but no sound coming out. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for the source. The heckler stood up. Emboldened by alcohol and whatever demons drove him, he shouted again. "You forgot where you came from! You forgot the people who made you!" 30,000 people collectively held their breath. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not to Elvis. The king of rock and roll didn't get heckled. He didn't get challenged. He was untouchable, a legend, an icon. But in that moment, standing on stage with the silence pressing down like a physical weight, Elvis Presley wasn't a legend. He was a man. A man who'd heard those words before. A man who'd wrestled with those accusations in the quiet hours of the night when the crowds went home and the applause faded. Subscribe now because what happens next will completely change how you see Elvis Presley. This isn't just a story about a concert. It's about the moment a legend chose humanity over image. Elvis slowly lowered his microphone. Not dropped it. Not thrown it. Lowered it with deliberate control. Then he did something no one expected. He stepped off the stage. Not toward the wings. Not toward his dressing room. Toward the heckler. Security moved to intercept, but Elvis raised a hand, stopping them mid-stride. His eyes never left the man in row 12. The crowd parted as Elvis walked down the steps at the side of the stage and into the audience. His white jumpsuit caught the spotlights, making him look like some kind of avenging angel descending from on high. The heckler's friends grabbed his arms, trying to pull him back into his seat, but he shook them off. He'd started this. He was going to see it through. Even as Elvis got closer and the reality of what was happening began to penetrate his whiskey-soaked brain, he stood his ground. Elvis stopped 3 feet from the man. The spotlights followed him, creating a circle of light around both of them. Everyone else faded into shadow. It was just Elvis and this stranger who'd called him out in front of 30,000 people. "What's your name?" Elvis's voice was quiet, but in the absolute silence of the arena, it carried to every corner. The heckler blinked. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't this. What? Your name? I'd like to know who I'm talking to. Bobby. Bobby Henderson. Well, Bobby Henderson. Elvis's voice remained steady, controlled. You said I forgot where I came from. You said I forgot the people who made me. He paused, and in that pause, you could feel the tension ratcheting up another notch. You want to tell me why you think that? Bobby's courage was starting to falter. Up close, sober, Elvis Presley was an imposing figure. But he'd come this far. My brother, Tommy Henderson. He was at your first show at the Louisiana Hayride. He followed you before you were anybody. Before the fancy suits and the movies and the millions. Where's Tommy now? Dead. Vietnam. 1968. Bobby's voice cracked. He died listening to your music on some transistor radio in a jungle. Thought you were the greatest thing that ever happened to music. Thought you were going to change the world. And right there, in that moment, everyone watching understood. This wasn't about insults or disrespect. This was about grief. About loss. About a man who'd lost his brother and needed someone to blame for the unfairness of a world that took good people too soon. Elvis stood silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Tommy Henderson. Louisiana Hayride. He nodded slowly, like he was searching his memory. I remember those shows. Every face in the crowd. Every person who took a chance on some kid from Tupelo who didn't know if he had what it took. He reached up and removed the scarf from around his neck. It was silk, deep blue, soaked with his sweat from performing under the hot lights. Your brother was there when it mattered. When I was nobody trying to be somebody. He believed in something before anyone else did. Elvis held out the scarf. This doesn't bring him back. Nothing can do that. But if Tommy Henderson was here tonight, I'd want him to know that I remember. I remember every single person who believed in me before I believed in myself. Bobby stared at the scarf. His hands trembled as he reached for it. When his fingers closed around the silk, something broke inside him. He collapsed into the seat behind him, the fight draining out of him like water from a punctured bucket. His shoulders shook with sobs. Elvis knelt down beside him. Right there in the aisle, in front of 30,000 people, the king of rock and roll knelt beside a heartbroken man and put a hand on his shoulder. No cameras could capture the words Elvis whispered to him. Those were private. Just for Bobby. Just for that moment. When Elvis stood up and walked back toward the stage, the arena remained silent. It was a different kind of silence than before. Not the silence of shock or anticipation. This was the silence of reverence. Of witnessing something profound and being changed by it. Elvis climbed back onto the stage. He picked up his microphone and stood there for a moment, collecting himself. Then he spoke to the crowd. We all lose people. We all carry them with us. Every song I sing, every show I do, is for the people who believed in me. The living and the dead. The ones who are here tonight and the ones who can't be here. He paused. This next song is for Tommy Henderson. And for everyone else who's not here to hear it. He began to sing. Bridge over troubled water. Not the way he usually performed it, with showmanship and flourish. This was raw. Stripped down. Just his voice and the pain and the beauty of trying to offer comfort when comfort seems impossible. His voice cracked on some of the high notes. He didn't care. This wasn't about perfection. It was about connection. About being human. But here's the part of this story that nobody expected. The part that still gives people chills decades later. As Elvis sang, Bobby Henderson slowly stood up. The scarf was clutched in his hand like a lifeline. And then, so quietly at first that only those near him could hear, he began to sing along. His voice was rough, untrained, breaking with emotion, but he sang. Then the people around him joined in. Row by row, section by section, that song spread through the arena like wildfire. 30,000 voices singing together. Singing for Tommy Henderson. Singing for everyone they'd lost. Singing because sometimes that's all you can do when the pain gets too big for words. Elvis stood on that stage and conducted them. Not with grand gestures or theatrical movements. Just standing there, tears streaming down his face, letting this moment of collective grief and healing wash over everyone present. When the song ended, there was no applause. Just silence again. But this time it was sacred. The silence of a shared experience that transcends entertainment and becomes something more. Something that stays with you forever. Share this story and subscribe because you need to hear what happened after the concert ended. The impact of this moment went far beyond that single night. Elvis went back to his dressing room and didn't emerge for 40 minutes. His manager was furious about the disruption to the show, the loss of momentum, the risk he'd taken going into the crowd. Elvis listened without responding. Then he asked for paper and a pen. He wrote a letter. To Bobby Henderson's mother. It started. Dear Mrs. Henderson, your son Tommy came to see me perform when I was nobody. He believed in me when I was just a kid with a dream. I want you to know that I never forgot. I never will forget. He had the letter hand-delivered to the Henderson family home the next morning. Along with the letter came something else. A gold record. One of Elvis's own, from his personal collection. On the back, he'd had engraved, For Tommy Henderson, who believed first. But the ripple effects went further. The story of that night spread. Not through official channels or press releases. Through the people who were there. They told their friends, their families, their children. It became one of those stories that defined who Elvis was beyond the image. The man behind the legend who, when challenged, chose compassion over ego. Connection over performance. Humanity over fame. Bobby Henderson kept that scarf for the rest of his life. He never washed it. Never displayed it. Kept it wrapped in tissue paper in a box under his bed. But once a year, on his brother's birthday, he'd take it out and hold it while he played Elvis records. It became his way of staying connected to Tommy. A bridge over the troubled water of grief. Years later, after Elvis died, Bobby gave an interview. He was asked what that night meant to him. He said, Elvis didn't have to do what he did. He could have had security throw me out. He could have ignored me. He could have made me look like a fool. Instead, he gave me my brother back. Not literally. But he gave me a way to remember Tommy that wasn't just about the pain of losing him. He gave me a moment where my brother was honored by someone he admired. That's a gift I can never repay. The scarf is now in a museum in Memphis. Next to it is the letter Elvis wrote to Mrs. Henderson and the gold record for Tommy. Thousands of people visit it every year. They stand in front of that display case and they understand something fundamental about Elvis Presley that his music alone could never convey. He was, first and foremost, a human being who understood pain. Who'd lost people himself. Who knew what it felt like to be vulnerable and broken and desperate for connection. And when someone challenged him, when someone called him out in front of the world, he didn't retreat behind his fame. He walked toward the pain. Both his own and theirs. That night in Memphis wasn't Elvis's most technically perfect performance. It wasn't his best-selling show or his most critically acclaimed. But it might have been his most important. Because it showed 30,000 people, and countless others who heard the story later, that greatness isn't just about talent or success or fame. It's about what you do when you're tested. How you respond when someone strips away the image and forces you to be real. Elvis Presley could have been many things that night. Angry. Defensive. Hurt. Instead, he chose to be kind. To listen. To honor someone's grief even when that grief was directed at him as anger. That choice, that moment of pure human connection, became part of his legacy in a way no hit song ever could. The next time you hear an Elvis song, remember Memphis 1974. Remember that behind every legend is a human being who bleeds, who hurts, who chooses kindness when they could choose pride. That's the Elvis Presley nobody talks about. The one who stopped a show for a grieving brother. The one who knelt in the aisle. The one who sang through tears. That's the king.